Hey, Grant.
Hey Dennis, how are you?
Good. How you doing?
Doing good.
All right. Branson, how are you? Tammy?
I'm good, Dennis. How about yourself?
Doing good. Thanks. I think. I don't want to look too close. Hey, Tammy, how are you? Hey, Mantra Soap, how are you? Hey, there's Tammy. Hey,
I'm
Tammy,
good,
how?
thanks. How are you?
I'm good. And Mantra Soap. All right. We'll wait just another minute or so. Get everybody on board. I'm trying something different this morning. I'm using my smartphone as my web camera. I don't know if you can tell any difference or not, but it seems to be a little bit clearer in sometimes I don't have much light in some of these rooms, so seems to brighten up a little bit. So I can't quite adjust it. I'll have to work on that. So I'm kind of over in the corner for now. All right. All right. So thanks everybody for coming. Hey, Sana, how are you?
Hi Dennis, I'm good. How are you?
Good. So today we're going to start with the rest of the category design material. So I'm going to, let's see here. How do I do this? Share screen. And hopefully that'll work. And hopefully everyone can see my, let's see, move this window away. Okay, can everyone see my screen okay?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, great.
Yep.
It's telling me to move my screen. I don't know what that means, but anyway. So we're going to revisit the last video, and then we got a handful of more. And then at the end of that, we'll talk some more about this really important. Okay.
So if you want to do this, how do you start to think this way? The idea of looking for what's missing. And that's, if you're looking at a market and it's already there and you're saying, well, that looks like a big market. This whole idea that has been around for a long time of, oh, that's a big opportunity. There's space for, several winners in that particular space. That's just total bull. It's just not, it's not true in digital markets, because we go back to, in digital markets, winners tend to take all. And so what you want to do is you want to look for a space that's new and that's missing. This is what Airbnb did when they got started. If you think about the story of Airbnb, these two guys in San Francisco had an apartment, a couple of designers, and there was a conference in town that all the hotels were sold out. And they thought, they didn't have much money. They thought, well, hey, we could blow up a couple of air mattresses, put them on the floor, and serve Captain Crunch in the morning, and put this on Craigslist, and maybe we'll get a couple people that would want to rent this from them. It worked. They quickly realized they thought this, and actually the whole company in the beginning was geared towards the idea of creating space when there were big conferences in town, in any particular town. But they thought realized that there was this missing thing of how do you have these sort of short-term opportunities to rent a place, when hotels don't work and you don't want to have a long-term rental on something like home away. And they constantly saw a bigger and bigger missing as they went. But this was a new space that they created. In fact, at one point, I was at this big business conference and sat next to the CEO of Marriott, and I turned to him and I said, "Well, you guys must really hate Airbnb, don't you?" And he surprised me, and he said, "No, we don't hate them all. We don't even feel like we compete with them." He said, "We hate like Expedia and Travelocity because they take their fees take a portion of our revenue, but these guys, like, we don't care because they see it as a completely different space."
One thing that's interesting about that is they have now, in fact, gone into the business to compete with Airbnb. Marriott has, so nothing's forever, I guess.
Another way to think is to think different, not just better. If you're entering a market space, with the idea of, well, okay, I see that company is doing this already, and we can go in there and just do it a little bit better, that's a way to have to claw for market share, not a way to like really blow it out as a category king. And so thinking about things, you want to be seen as something that's different, not just better. And this has been going on, in history forever in business. And you're laughing. You had one of these? Your family? So this is the Chrysler minivan, right? The little background story on the Chrysler minivan. 1980s. And Chrysler was going bankrupt. This was the time when Japanese cars were on the rise and killing all the U.S. car makers. And Chrysler was suffering the worst. Its back was against the wall. And the leadership at Chrysler, Lee Iacocca was the CEO at the time, was looking at demographic information and realizing that all these baby boomers, the surge in the population, were having all these kids. So there was a big boom in families. And at the time, there were basically two choices if you had a bunch of kids. You could either buy a station wagon, which was just kind of a long car and didn't have as much room as maybe you'd need, or you could buy a regular big old van, which didn't fit in your garage because it was too tall. And so they said, well, can we design a car that's built for, families can hold 4 or 5 kids and fit in the garage and appeal to that particular market? And they came up with this thing called the minivan. Importantly, think about category, right? They created a category of minivan, not a product called the minivan. They created a product called the Plymouth Voyager and the Dodge Caravan, but they established in our minds that you have a family, man, you need a minivan. And then if you need a minivan, then the next thought is, well, who makes the minivan, or who invented this thing? Well, it's Plymouth and Dodge, and those are the people to go to. So this thing basically saved Chrysler in the 1980s. And it saved it by thinking differently from anybody else in the car market. And by the way, category king status is a long-term thing, because you think about the whole thing about biases in our brains, you establish that bias, and it's hard to take away. And it's, what is it, like 40 years later, and Chrysler still owns 50% of the global minivan market. And this was one of my favorites. This is our takeaway from a couple of our favorite Silicon Valley VCs, who said their favorite kind of market is a $0 billion market. And a $0 billion market is a huge opportunity that only you can see. And you have to, and it takes a whole lot of faith and guts, because you have to be able to believe in it, even if others don't. And you have to be able to go and convince investors and convince customers that thing actually exists. But if it's a $0 billion market, you don't have anybody else chasing you yet, because you're imagining this thing from the ground up. And so if you're not if you can't look and say, I'm creating a $0 billion market, you're probably on a path you need to think about. Here are a couple of $0 billion markets, by the way. I have a personal story about AWS. I think seem to be constantly circling back to Jeff Bezos, but as a journalist, I had interviewed him many times from the time they were a small company. And I was 2006. I was at a technology conference in San Francisco, wandering around the floor. I get a ring on my cell phone, and it's the PR person from Amazon who says, "Can you come up to suite whatever it was? And Jeff Bezos wants to talk to you." And of course, I said, "Great, I'll be there." And hopped in the elevator, went up, and so I see Bezos, and we sit down, and he says, "I want to tell you about something we're thinking of doing at Amazon." And he describes this whole thing about renting our computing power by the SIP. That was the term he used at the time. And this was a very strange concept. I mean, nobody had done anything like this. And so he's explaining all of this to me, and started stumbling over it for a long time, and he kind of finished, and I looked at him and I said, well, so how are you ever gonna explain this to the public? And he said, what do you think I called you up here for? And he seriously was looking for me to write about it in a way that would help him figure out how to talk about it later. But I tell that story in part because he had no idea what AWS was going to become at the time. It was truly a $0 billion market at the time, and he just was throwing it against the wall to try to see if he could create this thing that had never existed before. And similarly, by the way, for this whole 5-hour energy, I mean, it's not just about technology, right? I mean, the guy who started 5-hour energy was wandering around a health food convention. He saw that there were all these energy drinks that were sold, big cans of liquid, and they were being sold in the refrigerator next to Coke and Pepsi and all these other kinds of things. And he goes, well, he's walking around, he's going, well, okay, I'm tired, I need a boost, but I'm not thirsty, I don't want to drink all this stuff. There's got to be a better way. And he created the idea of the energy shot, and in fact, made sure that it was something that was shelf stable so that it didn't have to be sold in a refrigerator next to other drinks. He sold it by the cash register. So it looks like an entirely different category of product. It's not a drink, it's an energy shot. And 5-hour energy now is a $5 billion business. So, $0 billion market, think different, find what's missing. Now, if any of you haven't read this book, one of my favorite books ever about technology, Where Good Ideas Come From by Stephen Johnson, who's a guy based here in New York. And Stephen, he started with this, and he's a friend of mine, by the way, too, and he started the work on this book just with the idea that if you go back in time, back 100 years, 150 years, before there was a lot of communication around the world, great inventions tended to pop up in different parts of the world where nobody could have possibly known what everybody else was doing. The car was being developed in the US and Europe at the same time. The flight was being developed in the US and Europe at the same time by people who had no idea what the others were doing. Why is that possible? Why did those things pop up at the same time? And he started doing research, and he landed on this idea of the adjacent possible, which looks like this. So if you imagine, this is, on this axis over here is what technology can do. And so, down here is stuff that's proven, the television and radio, or those, obviously those things down here. And somewhere up here is stuff that we think technology can do someday. It's, it's pie in the sky stuff. It's, it's holograms and crazy blockchain ideas or somewhere just a little beyond what technology can do. And along this axis down here is what society adopts and can accept. So, in this part here are things that we readily use in our lives. We got email, we watch TV, all those things. And out here are things that we're not ready for. You can introduce that product, but we're not quite ready for it. And imagine way out here somewhere is like basically science fiction. It's teleportation, it sits out there. So Stephen Johnson's point about the adjacent possible is that all of the great world-changing inventions tend to come in this thin line, just outside of what's already, what technology can provably do and what society provably wants to adopt, but not so far out that we don't quite get it yet, or not so far out that the technology is still sketchy. And what happens in this thin band right here is it's usually a combination of a bunch of things that exist already. So it's not, and the minivan is a perfect example of that, right? It wasn't like this radical, like new bubbly invention of a car or a flying car or anything like that would sit way out here somewhere. But it wasn't just, let's take a Volkswagen van and put nicer seats in it. It was something that took a bunch of pieces that were already here and were already in here and just took it outside this line a little bit so that it seemed new and it seemed to solve a problem that didn't exist before, and it seemed to push the technology or the capabilities just a little bit, but not so far out that it seemed crazy. And that's important because, I've seen, through my career, I've seen like probably 1,000 startups. I've sat with them, and I would say half of them are creating something that sits out here somewhere. That you go, and actually one of my co-authors for the book was Al Ramadan, and I first met Al in the 1990s because he started a company called Quokka Sports, and Quokka Sports had this idea of basically putting sports online and creating a new experience by adding a lot of data to what was flowing in, and being able to watch it on the web. Everything about what Quokka Sports was doing was right. 10 years too soon, because we didn't have, we still had dial-up modems. There was just, and the way that people thought wasn't quite there yet. Like, I want to watch this stuff on my laptop, and so Quokka was a breakthrough company. Like NBC and other companies signed contracts with them. They thought it was really cool. But as soon as the tech crash started to happen in the early 2000s, it went out of business because it didn't have the kind of adoption here, and the technology couldn't quite do it yet. And so we see that all of the time. It just sat too far out here somewhere. So the great new categories are, in fact, just a little bit outside of what already exists. So just to walk you through a little bit about on the back end, what category design, what category thinking can actually do for companies. This was a company called Big Panda that's based out of Silicon Valley. And Big Panda was a very deep B2B business. It was basically making dashboards that data centers could use to correlate alerts that were coming in and sort them out. There's a bunch of other companies in the space. They were about 4 years old, venture-backed. And this is what their website looked like, and this is how they described what they do. It automatically correlate your alerts, which didn't separate them from anybody else that was doing the same thing and didn't sound all that exciting. But they had a decent business in it, and they had some realization at the company that because we were correlating alerts, we had this enormous amount of data coming through our system. And they started to think, well, if we added we could throw that through some machine learning algorithms to start to understand more about what was going on, and maybe even start to automate the fixes to some degree just without having any humans having to touch it. They had all these big ideas, but they didn't quite know how to describe it, how to put it all together. So we worked with them and pulled it out of them, and they all started to, the concept and the missing spaces started to correlate in their brains, and they ended up coming up with this idea of autonomous digital operations, and a way to establish themselves as something that seemed different in the marketplace. And the analysts start to look at them differently. The marketplace starts to look at them differently. And it's a way to create essentially, at the start, one of the things it creates is at least it creates a conversation. They were able to go in and say, this is what we do. It's different from what everybody else is doing. Let's have a conversation about it and be able to tell you about it. And it's really kind of giving them a whole new direction. Now, Sensity was a company that made LED lights. And they had this, this insight that Philips and GE and everybody else who's making LED lights had, which is that you've got a light and you can put some circuitry in there and some sensors and get some data and some information out of it and maybe do things like connect and have a smarter home kind of situation. But they also realized that if you networked a lot of these things together, you could collect an enormous amount of data and analyze it, and the data would actually be more valuable than the lights. And so they came to this concept called light sensory networks, and really sold it more as a data play than a light bulb play. And went to like owners of malls, for instance, and said, if you put all our these bulbs in and connect them together, you could collect all this data about like the traffic going in and out, or air quality, anything else you wanted to understand about what was going on around your business. And that put them in a completely different bucket that made them look more like a tech company, a data company, a networking company. And about a year and a half later, what happened was they got bought not by GE or Philips at the valuation of a light bulb maker. They got bought by Verizon at a valuation of a technology company, of a data company, of a machine learning company. So the question is, when in a company's life cycle does it make sense to do this or think this way? And the question is, anytime. And I could cite all sorts of examples of any range of time frame. Now, yes, Airbnb, 5-Hour Energy, those were started by seeing a missing space, a category that could be created, and develop the product to that category. Big Panda, company that was 4 years old, already had done essentially what the company was started to do and got to a point of being stuck. Like, where do we take this next? And that's a good time to do it. We just worked with TaskRabbit. I'm sure many of you know TaskRabbit. And TaskRabbit was 10 years old and pretty successful in what it had been doing. But it realized that it had kind of stalled, it had done the same thing for 10 years, and knew that there was something still missing in the market, and a bigger and better way to do what they were doing and make it seem, and feel new again. And so that was, for them, that was a good time to do it. When IBM was 50 years old in 1964, when it introduced the System 360 computer, which was actually probably one of the greatest technology category, it basically created the category of the mainframe in 1964 by introducing this radical line of computers and junking its entire product line that it already had. It was 50 years old at the time. So companies can do this at any time in their history. It's just and some companies are great at doing it over and over again. Some companies do it from the beginning. Could be any time. Yes. But basically, the question was, can a startup do this? First of all, a couple answers. Just from our experience, from what we have seen, as we've talked to companies over, and about this whole idea of category design, fintech, healthcare, you name an industry that sounds difficult and established, it doesn't matter. There's new spaces and new opportunities in every single industry that's out there. I mean, we've seen it. We've seen companies come to us and have this experience. If you go into any established market and say, we're going to do essentially what they're already doing, but just a little bit better, then yeah, you're fighting the big guys. If you go into an established market with something that feels completely new and different, as many of you, I'm sure, have seen, when you're fighting a big corporation, an established company, they can't move that fast. They can't do these things oftentimes. And so the startups actually take share away from them by by doing the things that they can't do, that they can't figure out and can't manage to pull off right away. And as for a startup versus established company, yes, when an established company sees a new space, they can put all these resources behind it, but it's also really hard for them to do this kind of. Now, Chrysler, the minivan story happened because Chrysler's back was against the wall. They could take a chance on a $0 billion market. Ford and General Motors at the time had all the same demographic data, all the same capabilities, technology capabilities, manufacturing capabilities as Chrysler did at the time. They weren't willing to take a chance on something like that because they weren't desperate. And so what you often see with larger corporations, big companies, is that they're not willing to take those kinds of chances. They're more likely to try to incrementalize and just add, be a little bit better in some particular category that exists. And what we tell companies, and Mike is going to talk a little bit about this later, with something we call suit size. If you create a suit that's way too big for you, and it's a brilliant category, what you're doing is you're doing somebody else a favor, because you're not going to be able to pull it off, and somebody else is going to see that and go, Google's going to say, we could do that. And so with this startup, we walk them back, and again, this is coming from them. It's us, helping pull it out of them. We're not telling them this, but walk them back to what can you do that's on the path towards that. Keep that big thing in your pocket for now, but try to establish some new category that takes you on a path to that bigger thing, and know that you're going to take it in steps as you grow and get the capabilities. But yeah, the suit size concept, and Mike will talk about that in this next session, is really important, because you can't, as a startup, do something that's so enormous that it's like trying to take over Google or something. It's not going to happen. So one of the basic principles, it all comes back to the idea that companies that design a category and convince people that that's a category that they establish in people's minds, and you're the king, you're in the best position to dominate it over time. And that's basically the concept of the book Play Bigger, and what we take companies through and try to work with them on. And so that's this first part of the presentation. And thank you very much.
Okay. I want to just point out a couple of things that probably are obvious, but I feel like I should. One is, this guy is really talking about gigantic companies. Even his startup examples are large, heavily funded venture capital companies going after big categories and big markets. And I believe that you can use this concept of category design, but more as it applies to your world and your market and where you operate. So I just want to point out that I'm aware that this is really oriented toward really large companies. I think that the whole approach of trying to create your own category is somewhat scary. You might think it's a great idea. You might even have family members or some people that think this is a great idea, but you really don't have much in the way of the ability to do market research and market testing. And so I also realize that. The other thing is, in almost all of these cases, with the exception maybe of the minivan, all of these things were digital platforms. These were all places where branding, information, when they wanted to make a change, they did it digitally with their website, their communication. So I think that, I'm not sure how you look at your website or your social media or your other outward facing digital platforms, but realize that is, at least to a lot of people, that is who you are. That is your company. That they have no other way, really to know who you are. And in the old days, before websites, that the main thing was, did they see your commercial on TV, or did they happen to see your product in a grocery store? You had to find some way of building awareness, but we have a lot more opportunities now to build awareness than we ever have before. And so I think some thought on that is well considered. When we talk about category design, one of the things that seems to emerge from my perspective is this whole idea of kind of farming as an aspirational thing to get into. I don't know how familiar we've talked about Five Mary's Farm and some other places that have created brands around their life is what it amounts to. They're posting 5 or 6 times a day on Instagram. They're doing videos. They're doing all kinds of stuff. That's just unheard of before. And I'm not suggesting that all of you need to go live, or post 5 or 6 times a day. But it is a different world, and you do have kind of this decentralized media, this idea that you really are in control of your media for the most part, your platforms that you use. So there's a lot of things that are different than even this guy talking a couple of years ago. Things are even different from, because this was all before the pandemic when they were recording this. It was in 2019, I think, in early 2020. So, I'm happy to work with anybody who wants to just talk about categories and things that, are you in a position to think about it? There are worksheets on this on our member resources. If you want to go into that kind of detail, you certainly can. So with that, I wanted to ask if many of you participating in the Got to Be NC show this weekend? I know Sana is. Anyone else going to be involved in that?
I am. I'm gonna be there.
I'm sorry, who's that?
This is Dawn. I just popped in. I had something else going on, but I'm gonna be there this weekend.
Okay. I wanted to ask you guys. I don't know why it's kind of double. I'm not sure what's going on here. How many people are expected at that event? I'm just curious.
The email came out yesterday and said 8 to 12,000 is expected to go through there. Is what they said.
Yeah,
Jeez.
it's a 3-day event, and that's why I saw that. It's great, but I got so nervous. I've kind of just been working on that since. But are you gonna be there, Dennis?
I'm going to try to. I've at least for some part of it. I certainly won't be there the whole time, but I would like to try to make it there. And that's a big crowd. I had no idea that many people came to that. That's
It's over
incredible.
3 days: Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
Well, and this is at the fairgrounds, right?
Yes, I believe it's at the pavilion. Is that right? The big pavilion. Yeah.
Pavilion.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear. Somebody said something.
It's at the big pavilion at the State Fairground.
Okay. That probably that Dorrance Arena.
Sporting Arena, right. I think that's what it is.
Okay. Well, I think I really wish everyone does well, and you're able to really get the word out there, and hopefully, can you make sales, I assume, of your product from the show?
Yes.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm gonna try to make it out there, and you all look for Jack Nails, who he's not here today, but he's in our class. I think he's in charge of Got to Be NC, or he's one of the guys that are in charge of that program. So you might look for him. He's a great guy, and he's real interested in helping everybody. He's come to most of the classes. He's not here today. I'm sure he's really busy with that whole thing. So well, that's great. right,
Dennis,
anyone-
I will send you a map of the vendor
Okay.
map of the event. So if anything, it'll help you find us.
Thank you. Oh, I'll be looking.
And this is Ruth. I'd appreciate feedback from you guys who are participating for next year, I have heard from previous friends who are food entrepreneurs that there was a lot more grazers than buyers.
Oh, okay.
So I've been a little concerned, like you, Sana, about the number of people coming through. And if they, how much it really would net to do it. So I'd appreciate your all's feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm not doing sampling because that takes a lot, at least for me, to do samples. I actually have to cook my product and I cannot pre-prepare it because it's eggs and I don't want like cold eggs sitting there. I just feel like they don't end up tasting very good. So I'm not going to be doing any sampling. I'm just going to be showing my product and selling it. But yeah, absolutely. We'll let you know whatever I see there.
Yeah, that
One
makes
of the
sense.
things-
Thank you.
One of the things I wonder about, I'm on the board of the North Carolina Rural Center, and they had a meeting for the first time in a couple of years, maybe a month or so ago. And the attendance at that meeting was triple their normal. And it was mostly people who were just basically ready to get back together. And I wonder if that will apply here as well. They probably haven't had the Got to Be NC show for a year or more. So it might actually be, bigger than normal because it is kind of coming out of the pandemic, but I don't know. Okay.
You guys made it to the state fair late last year. I believe it was in October. I was there. I'm assuming this is going to be the same thing at Dorton Arena that they did at the state fair. At Dorton Arena, they called it the Got to Be NC Pavilion. And they had all these vendors set up there who were sampling and selling their products. So I'm assuming it's going to be exactly the same thing as far as the vendors are concerned. I did see a good crowd, but again, it was a state fair and it was a week-long thing. There was a really good crowd, but I think it would be a similar type of crowd here as well.
Okay. My only story about the North Carolina State Fair, the very first time I went, which is probably about 8 or 9 years ago, my wife's son went with us, and at the time I think he was about I think he was maybe 18 or 19 or something like that, and he bought the largest leg. I don't know what it was. It was, I don't know, a dinosaur leg. It was the biggest thing I have ever seen in my life, and he walked around eating that thing like a caveman. I've just never seen anything like it. And there were people lined up to buy those gigantic, whatever the hell they were. So anyway, that made an impression on me. Kind of caveman kind of place. So, everyone's got to have their thing, right? So cavemen need places to go too. Okay.
Dennis, I will say, back to your point about people wanting to get back together after the pandemic. I think you're right. I think that they're going to be really successful this weekend because I did Broogaloo a few weeks ago, downtown Raleigh, and it was 4 blocks long and you could not get through the crowd, the whole 4 blocks. I mean, I think they said there were 50,000 people there and it was only one day.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think people are really excited to get back together with each other. So hopefully that's how it will be this weekend.
Yeah, no, I hope so. Well, I'm gonna try to get there if I can. Does it start tomorrow, Sana?
It's Friday through Sunday.
Okay, Friday through Sunday. Okay. All right. Well, is there anything else anyone has for today? Okay. Well, thank you for your interest in all this stuff, and I'm hoping that we end up with a couple of category definers or busters out of this process. I think we have the potential. So thanks everybody, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks, Dennis.
Bye.
Bye.